Welcome, everybody. I am sitting here with Dr. Carrie Gress, who just recorded a new podcast on the Art of Catholic with me, talking about her books, Theology of Home 1 and 2. You can find these at theologyofhome.com. I would highly encourage them, as well as Carrie's other books, particularly The Anti-Mary and the Marian Option, are two books I really, really enjoy, and I had to talk about them on this podcast as well. But I wanted to have her just speak to you guys, the patrons, for a couple of minutes about something we did not get to in the podcast. And that is, it's kind of a broader question. And my question, Carrie, is, as you were going through and you were working on these Theology of the Home books, is there something that started to kind of come out that, there are problems in the home and the underlying issues that you were kind of addressing, sometimes directly, but sometimes in an indirect way, in writing these books?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great question. The overarching idea, of course, is just the changes that have happened in women, I think, in the last 50 years. And the big part is just really recognizing that we've been told to be something that we're not. So, for example, imagine that you are built like Michael Phelps, really tall. You're very strong. You have this long torso. You're great at swimming. And all of a sudden people are like, swimming, it's nice, but it's not cool anymore. So we want you, Michael, to take that body and you need to be a jockey because jockeys are cool. And I think that, everybody can imagine what's going to happen to Michael Phelps as a jockey. I mean, first of all, he's not going to be able to find anything that fits him. But there's not going to be a lot of success here with the horse. I mean, the poor horse and him, winning as a jockey. And I think this is, we see, you're laughing at me, you're laughing at this because we see the ridiculousness of this. But this is really what women were sold, I think, in so many ways back in the 60s, was this idea that we will be happy if we become just like men. And so as a result, we've sort of erased this whole sense of what it means to be a woman. In fact, I've published pieces that really simple pieces about, womanhood and things about how, women are meant to hold things. We do with our arms. Our arms are bent differently so that we can cradle a baby. We have wombs, we have hips. All these things reveal that we're meant to hold things. We hold women or hold people in our hearts, in our prayers. Stein has this great quote about how we are meant to shelter others so they can unfold. So I think that part of the issue was really, how do we help people, both men and women, get back to this understanding of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman? And again, we address this with this idea of fruitfulness, what it means to be fruitful, instead of what does it mean to be powerful or in control, which is, I think, really this grasping that we have been doing as women rather than being, who we are, which is just embracing things, in a healthy, ordered way. Instead, we're grasping at things with ambition. And that's really where a lot of the unhappiness is coming from, is, again, we're sort of the Michael Phelps on the horse because we're trying to do things that are not going to make us happy instead of what ultimately will make us happy. And that those things come through fruitfulness and kind of those natural desires of our heart, compassion, things like compassion, relationships, all of those things are important.
Could you sum it up with a statement like, women are essentially being asked to be men in a lot of ways?
Yeah.
I mean, that's really kind of at the heart of it in some ways.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely it. And, it's ironic now that we see men trying to compete with women. It's sort of the snake is eating its own tail. It's the same ideology. And again, it was all kind of baked into the cake. They wanted to get rid of genders entirely, so that we are just these genderless people. And yet that's, obviously incredibly unhealthy. It's also very sterile. And that's the piece. So we wanted to bring back this sort of three-dimensional reality of what feminism, or what it means to be feminine, but also in contrast what it means to be masculine, because these are not supposed to be collapsed into one, pod, but have beauty and layers and drama and all kinds of things happening because of them, and not just sort of this gray world that we're living in now.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think people sit back and go, where in the world did this all come from? Like, how did we get here? Where there are lawsuits about, guys who say they're girls and competing against them in track events and just blowing their
Yeah.
doors off and all the rest of this kind of stuff. And you're like, what is
Right.
happening, right? And you said,
Yeah.
and this is a lot of what you talk about in the Anti-Mary, if I remember correctly, is this was part of the plan from the beginning, and it's
Yeah.
really kind of coming to fruition. But there's
Yeah.
also a sense that it's kind of just decimating true feminism. Like even the things that a lot of feminists were fighting for are being
Oh,
eviscerated at this
absolutely.
point.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And this is where you see it as the ideology that it is that where are the feminists? Some of them are reacting, but most of them are just keeping silent. And it's again because they want this gender neutralness. They want this capacity for human nature to be malleable and make it anything that we want it to be. And that's the real problem. That's the underlying piece of all of it is that you can't do that. We've got these sort of inborn realities in our skin, in our cells, in our DNA, in our, the gray matter of our brains. All of these things are very different between men and women. And so to try and erase them this is really where the damage is. And unfortunately, we are entering this awful stage where young girls, because they're making it look popular and the cool thing to do, are taking hormones, male hormones. They're having their breasts cut off. These are things that can't be undone. And that's the real tragedy is once the fad's over, you've got this poor girl through, basically no fault of her own. She just didn't have people to protect her and to guide her properly. She's in this situation where she probably could be rendered sterile. She will never have the life that she should have had because of the hormones and the damage that are being done on a biological level. So, it's not like you can just switch that off. Those are things that can't be undone.
But you pull out your crystal ball for a second here and tell me, as someone who's really, you went deep into a lot of this stuff and you look way back into the history, you saw the whole progression of all of this happening throughout the last few decades. Where do you see this in 10 or 15
Yeah.
years?
Yeah, I think that we basically have two choices. We can embrace it, or we can reject it. And I think that the divide is gonna become clearer because there are gonna be those like us who are happy and healthy and ordered and having children, and then there's gonna be the other divide, which is broken, sterile, miserable. So, on the one hand, you can sort of pray that the pain, it's God's megaphone, that will wake people up to see that what they're doing is so disordered and unhealthy. But I think that we have a great opportunity, though, to even all the more pour out books like Theology of Home, where you can show that there's an alternative. And this is what we haven't done as the church. We haven't shown people there's an alternative. We make great intellectual arguments, but we don't know how to get them out there to everyday people. So I think that that's an important piece is to recognize that we have to kind of give women and men an off ramp. We have to help them know if you're miserable, this is why you're miserable, and we can help you. I think that those are really the options, but also the opportunity that we have to work.
You can feel powerless at times because you're fighting against this entire culture and
Machine, yeah,
Hollywood. It just
yeah,
it glamorizes all of
yep,
this, and so the reality of what's really there, you just don't realize it until it's too late. Or if you've never done it, you're looking at it going, "Oh, is that what it's about? Okay, I don't have any problem with that as long as it makes them happy, whatever."
right,
And as Catholics, I think a lot of times this is where the principle of subsidiarity comes into play here. And this is one of the things I think your books speak to in Theology of the Home. What we have to present to people is that kind of ordered, to the extent we can, beautiful lives that are showing forth the fruitfulness of who God is in that loving capacity that we should have, showing hospitality and preaching the gospel through the way that is we live our lives in our homes. And that's what, when people will respond to that because it's
yeah,
real, right?
yeah.
And this is one of the reasons why I think what it is you have done in these books is such a natural extension of what it is that you were doing in your previous work.
hmm And I think that this is the model precisely that was in the early church. If you see all the saints' names, you've got women like Cecilia, you've got Monica, you've got Lucy, all of the, Agnes and Agatha, all these women that they didn't just they weren't just martyrs and that was it, but they brought along their households, their masters, their slaves, a whole community of people around them. And this is what women have a deep capacity to do. And so that's why I've been motivated to do these things is I just need to change one woman and she will change the women around her. And then, it's a domino effect. So trying to support families and women in this endeavor where we don't feel overwhelmed, but we feel like, okay, I can influence my husband or I can influence my children. Start very, very small, with that expectation that we're only going to do small stuff. But I think when we do that well, then that spreads much more easily than if we're, trying to go out protesting or rioting or whatever, because people feel helpless. So I think that the help or the project needs to start very, very small, and with that effort. And then it's like dominoes, it will grow and become something, far beyond our imagining. But that is the model of the early church. This isn't something that I cooked up on my own by any stretch of the imagination.
I mean, you're smart, but you're probably not that smart. But you are smart.
Yeah, I am not that smart.
So thanks for
trial
that.
and error. Trial and error. So yeah.
What's that?
I said it's all been trial and error. I've made so many mistakes thinking that I could just logically argue people into the faith, and that just hasn't.
And there's a time and place for that, right? I mean, we have to have answers for our faith, and the Catholic faith makes sense.
Absolutely.
Right? It's one of the reasons I became Catholic. But
right.
I've also learned throughout the years that just humiliating somebody in an argument is not going to bring them into the church. It just isn't.
Yeah. And what worked to bring you in the church was something different for me. Everybody, it's something slightly different. And I think that that's the beauty of it is there's all these different ways that we draw people in. So
no, conversion is a very personal experience. And I think that too, when someone comes into your home, getting back to your Theology of Home books, it's a very personal manifestation. It's a physical manifestation of who you are in your person. Right. And so there are things that I'm going to be attracted to in your person that are shown in your home. Or hopefully are. And that's how we can attract people into the faith, even when we're not actively evangelizing. And it's a powerful, powerful way to draw people into the beauty of God.
Yeah, we have one of my favorite lines of the book is we can't always get people to church, but we can always get them into our homes for a meal. So yeah. I think
yeah, and one of the things that we didn't talk about in the podcast, but it's such a tragedy that so many of our churches have been denuded of their beauty, and we need to work to bring that back as well, because the church is that is our second home, or maybe it's even our primary home, because it's God's home, and that's the real family that we are a part of. And so as Catholics, we shouldn't just be focusing on our own home dwellings, but also the dwelling place of God in our churches and make them as beautiful as they can be.
I don't think that they're unrelated. In fact, I'm actually working on an article right now about how radical feminism recavated women, that expression, a church was recavated instead of renovated. I think that that's what's happened with women. And this is why we're seeing it in the churches. This is why it was allowed to happen, because we just completely misunderstood what beauty is, what the feminine is, what the purpose is. So it's very interesting to see how the 1970s was at the heart of all of the destructive trends in the church and whatnot, but we see the same exact trends among women. So it fascinates me to think about, if we can bring women back, then kind of the whole family regenerates, and then churches regenerate, because those are the primary cells of the church. So all of these things are very much, I think, related, and start in the human heart for sure.
Amen to that. So again, the books that I want you guys to check out, Theology of Home Part 1 and Part 2, you can find them at theologyofhome.com, and you can look at Carrie up at carriegress.com. And Carrie, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to my patrons. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure.
God bless.
You too. Ciao.